Hello everyone, my name is Hornung and I'm very happy to present an article that I've written together with Bandelow, which is entitled Party Identification and Cultural Theory in Europe, Methodologically Advancing Comparative Studies of the Advocacy Coalition Framework. The article has been published in the Journal of Comparative Policy Analysis, and the study that we have conducted in this article is also comparative by design, which will become clear already on the first slide. Our starting point of the article is that there has been an increased attention on the measurement of deep normative core beliefs in ACF research, and that scholars have increasingly drawn upon the use of cultural theory to measure deep normative core beliefs, but this has been done particularly and largely in US American contexts and so far not been transferred to Europe. So we are asking ourselves whether cultural theory can be used to measure deep normative core beliefs also in European countries, or whether there are alternative measurements or supplementary measurements of deep normative core beliefs that have to be observed here. This connects to the research gap that there is so far a lack of systematic, encompassing, and comparative research on deep normative core beliefs and their operationalization in European contexts. The theoretical perspectives upon which we draw in our article are the ones that are the essential foundations of the ACF. This is firstly the three-tiered belief system, which comes from psychology and assumes that there are different types of beliefs that are guiding policy actors' preferences and behavior, and the only recently added perspective of cultural theory as one approach to measure deep normative core beliefs. However, we also draw on additional theoretical perspectives to shed more light on the measurement of these deep normative core beliefs. And this is firstly the observation of very prominent research that there are links between cultural worldviews and partisanship. This hypothesis has been confirmed especially for Nordic and Northern European countries, but also the postulation that partisanship and core values are not only strongly related, but that core beliefs and values are actually the result of a strong party identification. This also adds and connects to research on the relevance of partisanship in Europe, because especially in European contexts, political parties have been found to exert a particular influence on policy actors' preferences and behavior, and especially compared to the US American context, where parties so far have not the relevance that they have in Europe. The hypotheses that we pose in this article are derived from this literature, and we firstly assume that partisanship can be either an indicator of cultural worldviews, so that party identification and cultural worldviews are strongly connected and therefore can be used as interchangeably as indicators and as operationalization of deep normative core beliefs, or competing hypothesis that partisanship is an additional measurement of deep normative core beliefs that enhances rather than complements or supplements the measurement of deep normative core beliefs through cultural worldviews. The second hypothesis is that whether partisanship is an indicator or an additional measurement of deep normative core beliefs is strongly depending on the national context, so that this relationship between the two concepts differs depending on the country that we're in. And the third hypothesis postulates that the relationship is also depending on the policy subsystem in which we find ourselves. so that some policy subsystems might trigger cultural worldviews or party identification, and therefore one of these two is better suited to operationalize and measure the deep normative core beliefs that underlie the policy core beliefs that we observe in these subsystems. To research and to test these hypotheses, we used the widely known and recognized European Social Survey in its round of 2016. It encompasses data from approximately 20,000 individuals in 20 countries, European countries, and it also entails specific questions that are very suitable to measure party identification, cultural worldviews, and policy core beliefs. We have 16 items to measure cultural worldviews, 4 per each worldview, among which we select the one that is best depicting the respective worldview. We have the measurement of party closeness as an item that depicts partisanship. We have 4 policy core beliefs that are gathered on nuclear energy, immigration policy, basic income, and EU policy. And we test the hypothesis not only by correlation statistics, but also by regression analysis to assess effects on policy core beliefs and see whether partisanship or cultural worldviews are explaining policy core beliefs, which would then mean that they can be seen as indicators of deep normative core beliefs. And we perform separate analysis and interaction and calculate interaction effects to account for the country differences and to see whether the relations between these concepts differ depending on the national context. Our results show firstly that it indeed depends on the country which concept, whether partisanship or cultural worldviews, are better suited to explain policy core beliefs. And this is an overview of the single regression analysis. So we have performed per each country a separate regression analysis per each policy core beliefs to see whether partisanship or cultural worldviews better explain these core beliefs. And we see that in some countries, both partisanship and cultural worldviews have a significant effect on policy core beliefs, but that in some countries, partisanship is much more important, which is, for example, the case in Poland. If we look at the results of the overall countries, so here we have not separated the regression analysis per country, but performed an overall analysis, there we see that it indeed also depends on the policy subsystem whether parties or cultural worldviews are suitable indicators of deep normative core beliefs and therefore explain policy core beliefs. This is, for example, the case for immigration policy, but also for EU unification policy, where we see almost for every party family, in fact, a significant effect of partisanship and party identification on the policy core beliefs. And these models are not only significant, but also have a considerable explanatory power with variance explained that is almost, or reaches between 19 or 24%. If we look at the cultural worldviews and their effect on policy core beliefs, we see that these are indeed not as significant as the party identification. The only cultural worldview that has an effect on policy core beliefs is the fatalist worldview, and this is also only the case for immigration or EU unification policy. So at least in our models, we see that partisanship is much more important and a better indicator for deep normative core beliefs than cultural worldviews, at least in the European countries. If we then look at the interaction effects, which we also calculated to see whether, depending on the policy subsystem, there are country effects, interaction effects between countries and cultural worldviews, we see that indeed the effect of cultural worldviews, although it has been quite low and insignificant on the overall level, can be quite significant when looking at the country contexts. So, for example, again, the fatalist worldview seems quite important for many countries if you look at EU unification policy, although in the case of nuclear policy, the fatalist worldview still has no effect and no significant effect independent of the country we're in. On the other side, when looking at basic income policy core, policy subsist, the basic income policy, we see that the egalitarianist worldview exerts some influence, for example, in the Czech Republic, also in Spain. So it seems that at least in some specific countries, it might be that the cultural worldview also has a significant effect on policy core beliefs and therefore also depicts parts of deep normative core beliefs in these countries. To conclude, we can say that, at least in Europe, partisanship partly depicts deep normative core beliefs and thereby explains some variance in policy core beliefs, but that this is not true for all policy subsystems or all countries. So it must also be emphasized that, depending on the country and on the policy subsystem, the measurement of deep normative core beliefs works better with cultural theory than partisanship, or vice versa. So this is really depending on the country and the policy subsystem, which then also confirms all of our hypotheses. Our take-home message for you then is, when operationalizing deep normative core beliefs, it is important to take into account both cultural theory and partisanship, but also alternative measurements that we have not addressed in our article, and that it is important to make it an empirical question what better explains the formation of policy core beliefs in different contexts, countries and policy subsystems alike. Thank you very much for your attention. And we also want to make a small promotion of our own journals. At this point, we, Niels and me, we co-edit 2 journals that are published under the aegis of the Policy Studies Organization and in cooperation with Wiley. This is firstly the European Policy Analysis Journal, for which we also invite articles that explicitly address either theoretical perspectives or empirical subjects in Europe, and the Review of Policy Research, which is explicitly interested in science, technology, and environmental politics and policy. So if you have any articles, we very much welcome your high quality submission here. Thank you very much.